Welcome to Stories Without Borders, the podcast. I'm your host, Holland. Here we interview people who use the power of stories in service to promote connection, empathy, and understanding around the world. You can learn more online at storieswithoutborders.org or follow us on Instagram and YouTube at stories_without-borders. Thanks for listening. Here's today's episode. Today, we are speaking with award-winning author, screenwriter, and producer Abdi Nazemian. Abdi has written for a number of TV shows, including Ordinary Joe and The Village. He has written films including The Artist's Wife, Menendez Blood Brothers, and The Quiet. Abdi's first novel, The Walk-In Closet, was awarded Best Debut at the Lambda Literary Awards. He has since written 5 YA novels, The Authentics, Like a Love Story, Only This Beautiful Moment, The Chandler Legacies, and Desert Echoes. Like a Love Story won Stonewall Honor and was chosen by Time magazine as one of the 100 best young adult books of all time. Only This Beautiful Moment has won a number of awards, including the Stonewall Award, the Lambda Literary Award, and the Amy Mathers Award from the Canadian Children's Book Centre. As head of development for Waters End Productions, Abdi has been an executive producer or associate producer on numerous films, including Call Me By Your Name, The House of Tomorrow, and Little Woods. So yay, welcome Abdi.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. It's such an honor. I'm a big fan of all your books. So I'm so excited to introduce you to our audience. One thing I really love about your work is that you're a very personal writer. You incorporated a lot of your own experiences. And one of the things that has stood out is like you mentioned that you live in a lot of different places and how you incorporate that into a lot of your stories. Could you start by explaining and giving us a brief snapshot of your own personal story, including how and when you decided to be a writer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll give as short a version as I can, and feel free to ask follow-ups if there's pieces that I skip over too fast. But I was born in Iran, which is an incredibly important part of my identity that I write about often. But when I was 2 years old, there was a revolution in Iran, and my parents left, and we went to France. We spent 5 years in Paris. And when I was 7, we all moved to Toronto and we became Canadian citizens, but we only stayed there for 3 years. Kind of crucially for me, at least, when we lived in Toronto, we were living in 2 kind of side-by-side buildings in the middle of the city with a lot of my cousins and aunts and uncles. So it was a very happy time for me because I felt so culturally displaced a lot of my childhood. But then when I was 10, we moved to the suburbs of New York, just my immediate family, and that was much harder. That was like probably the first time I felt, because I was no longer with my cousins.
Right.
I felt like a real sense of isolation and culture shock. Up until that point, I'd also only been in cities, so the suburbs felt very foreign. It was my introduction to America, and I didn't fit in. I mean, I've written about this in a lot of my books, but and then when I was 14, I was sent away to boarding school, to a school called Choate Rosemary Hall in Connecticut, which is very much the inspiration for the Chandler Legacies. Yeah. And that was probably when I started to understand that creativity was something I loved. I never, like many immigrant kids of my generation, a career in the arts was not something that seemed like an option. So I didn't think that was what I would do. But in boarding school, I discovered my love for acting and improv and theater. And I was the first student at our boarding school to direct a full show.
So were you more like a theater kid, or were you more like in tech?
Theater kid, I would say. But also just a creative kid. I loved writing. I had an English teacher who was a big, big figure in my life. He really gave me an example of like what it could be to be an adult that was different from the ones I saw. He's the first person I came out to. So I started to get exposed, and then went to college in New York City, did a lot of internships in film and media, and I was told by my last boss to move to LA. Just get a one-way ticket if you want to work in the entertainment industry, which I did. I grew up, I should say also, those years in the suburbs, I became obsessed with like movies, old Hollywood movies, books, music. Because I didn't have a lot of friends, I just immersed myself in fictional worlds.
Yeah, I feel like that's the case with a lot of people that are like, I need to escape this world that I'm in.
You need to escape, and so fiction, and any fictional world, be it through a book, a film, a musician, whatever, it empowers you by making you feel like there's somewhere in the world you might belong that isn't where you're from. And so when I came to LA, I did what everybody does, and I just got assistant jobs. And for 2 years, I had 2 different bosses. And other than answering phones, my biggest job was reading scripts. So it was after 2 years of reading scripts, and you don't just have to read the script, you have to provide what's called coverage for your boss, which is a summary of the script plus a recommendation of whether they should read it or not, because your bosses never have time to read the
Right.
hundreds of scripts. And so in doing so, it's almost like going to grad school for screenwriting, where you're like, well, why does the script work or not work? And how do I communicate that to my boss? And after 2 years of that, I was like, wait a minute. Like, why shouldn't I be a writer? Like these people, all the people submitting scripts are getting paid to write. And I feel like I love to write and I'm not making as much as them answering phones. And so that's when I called a friend of mine who was getting an MFA in playwriting and said, do you want to write a screenplay together? And we did. And that started. I'll stop there because that like was the beginning of my writing career, which started only with film and TV.
So your first novel, The Walk-in Closet, is self-published?
It is self-published, yeah.
And it's about the Persian community in Los
Yes.
Angeles, and it was written for adults.
Yes.
And then you sort of pivoted to more YA stuff with The Authentics. Can you explain that process and why you decided to switch genres?
Yeah, I mean, so The Walk-in Closet was a novel I wrote largely out of a frustration I felt in my first decade of writing in Hollywood, which was I couldn't get anything about Iranian people made or queer people. And it was a very different time. Like sometimes I'll tell young people things that I heard back then and they don't believe it. But like the very first script I wrote for a studio, the first set of notes came back, and one of the bullet points was cut all gay characters. And that was just
Wow.
it wasn't even something we flinched at. Just cut all the gay characters. I mean, that was what we were told to do. It was very, very clear all along the way that telling my personal stories, given the background I had, would be very hard.
Right.
And after about 10 years, I realized I had written a lot of personal scripts. They just never got made. And I'm like, I have to get something out there in the world. So I wrote The Walk-in Closet largely out of like a deep desire to just put something on the page about my cultural community. It was also, I should say, the first novel to ever have a lead gay male Iranian character.
That's
and it came
amazing.
out in 2014. So that just tells you how rare it, well, you know, how,
And 2014 isn't even that long ago.
it's not that long ago. But it's also, you know, in our community, people weren't coming out in the same
Right.
way. There were, of course, queer people, but it wasn't, we weren't identifying as openly queer in the same way as Western counterparts of ours. So that book was rejected everywhere. I mean, I got literary agents, they sent it to every publishing. And back then there were more publishers, but everyone rejected it. And I gave up. I was kind of like, well, it's not worthy of being published. And a couple years later, I had kids and I went to business school. So I had a little bit of a mid-career moment where I thought maybe I would stop writing, because it is, for anyone listening who wants to be a writer, you have to understand that there's no consistency. You can have a great success followed by the worst failures of your life. You can work a lot one year and make a lot of money and not make any. So there was a point when I had my kids where I'm like, should I pivot into something more stable? But it was ironically business school that got me back into writing, but in a much more fruitful way. And one of the things was that I started to realize, like, I believed in The Walk-in Closet as a book. And yes, it had been rejected everywhere, but I was studying business. I was studying entrepreneurs who believed in themselves. I'm like, well, I believe in myself, so I'll self-publish it. And my agency at the time had a lot of infrastructure to help me. So, I mean, yes, I self-published it, but they had relationships with cover designers and editors and distributors, and they helped me a lot. And the book ended up winning the Lambda Literary Award, which is a pretty prestigious award in the LGBTQ space. And nobody expected it.
Including yourself?
Including myself. I flew to New York for the Lambda Literary Awards, and my agent at the time, he met me and my husband for drinks before the awards, and he was like, if you were going to win, they would have told me. So just go have fun. You're not going to win. I'm not going to go because we had a drink now. And then I won, and I texted him, and I'm like, you weren't there, and I won. But he was the one who then said to me, you should keep writing books. This one obviously did a lot better than any of us expected, but you should pick a genre or a lane that is a little more commercial so we can try to sell your book. And so I was thinking, he gave me a list, and the list was things like, you can imagine, it's like thrillers or horror or rom-com or, romance, all that stuff. But YA was on the list. And kind of simultaneous to this, my cousin Vida is a school teacher. She's amazing. I love her. she was very much like immersed in YA literature before I
Yeah.
was, because when I was young, YA wasn't a thing. And she was sending me books. So she, through her, I discovered what was happening in YA. So I was reading books like Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, or Simon versus the Homo sapiens, like a lot
Oh,
of the
yeah.
early queer YA books. And they were very, like Aristotle and Dante, especially, is so culturally specific.
Yeah.
And it was such a big success. And so I'm like, wait, there's a world where people actually want these small, culturally specific queer stories. Like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that was really what convinced me to try YA. It felt like a world that I could hopefully write, that also wanted the stories I want
Yeah.
to tell. And that's always a very hard thing as a writer, is like, there's a kind of story I know I want to tell. And often I'm picking, like, I didn't think I could write books. Books were way above what I thought I could do. I mean, I had to take the TOEFL to get into college. English was not my first language.
Yeah.
Writing prose felt way above me, but I'm like, okay, this is a world where people seem to want the stories I have to tell. I'm going to have to learn how to write within this world.
You're a very, very poetic writer. I mean, at least in my opinion, because you have such vivid
Thank you.
imagery and like metaphors. And I'm like, oh wow, I never thought of it that
That
way.
means a lot. But some of that might come from the fact that I speak. So I speak 5 languages.
Right.
I love languages. And in some ways, maybe the poetry comes from the fact that the Persian language is very poetic, and we do
Yeah.
speak in different ways. And that might color the way I write in English, because I don't necessarily communicate in English the way someone does who was born and raised here. I still
Yeah.
speak Persian with my parents and my cousins all the time. I grew up in France and went to French school in Canada. So French is very ingrained in me. We speak Spanish in our home a lot. Like, so I feel like there's different ways, kind of in the same way that, like, there's musicians, like ABBA being the most obvious one
Right.
from Sweden, but there's so many foreign musicians who write in English, and they're so good at writing lyrics that feel a little odd. But you're
Yeah.
always like, it works so well. And I think part of it is because English is not their first language.
I've heard you speak a lot about like a love story, your third novel and second YA novel,
Yes.
and how it was a turning point for you as a writer. The book itself is about three teens in 1989 New York City that navigate love and loss during the AIDS epidemic. It won several awards and honors and has also been banned in certain places. So I'm wondering, why is it important for you to tell this specific story?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, so Like a Love Story for me is a big turning point. I think part of that is because it was the first book where I felt like I was really writing about my own personal emotional journeys. I mean, in The Walk-In Closet and The Authentics, I was writing about Iranian culture, but I was always writing about it from the perspective of a character who was very different than me. I mean, in both books, the protagonist whose voice you hear the book through is a female character. I was never really plumbing the depths of my own emotional journey. And the way Like a Love Story came about is that I had the Authentics had come out. I had a great editor and publisher, and they wanted to do a follow-up book with me. And they asked me to pitch some stories. And after a decade in Hollywood, I was thinking of pitches as like what a Hollywood pitch is. Like, think of a great log line and a big concept. And so I kept pitching them these big concept ideas, and they kept rejecting them. And then finally I had lunch with my editor, and she was like, I want you to write the book that you want to write, like the book that's from your heart. And what is that? And for many, many years, I had wanted to write a version of Like a Love Story. I didn't know what the plot would be, but I said to her, I'm like, the only thing that I've always wanted to write that I feel like I couldn't because of the boundaries in Hollywood was a book about what it felt like for me moving as an immigrant kid to New York during the worst years of the AIDS crisis, knowing inside, it was the first years where I could feel inside that I was gay, but I didn't even have a word for it, but I could tell I was different and attracted to men. And I came into the city that was kind of the center of the crisis, and all the information that was available to me was about the stigma, the shame, the fear, equating gayness with death. And I'm like, in my brain, I'm thinking like, she's just going to be like, you are absolutely out of your mind. You cannot write that book, especially as a YA book. And she was like, that's what I want you to write. And I'm like, what? And that to me, again, like, this to me is the magic of YA. It's a world where editors and readers are demanding the most personal stories. I couldn't believe they wanted this book. And I went in, I don't plot out my book. So I went into a deep research mode. I knew that I wanted to write a lot about ACT UP. And so ACT UP is an organization that I grew up reading about, that I feel very grateful for. So I did a lot of research. I immersed myself back in the music of the time. I really put myself for a period back in the shoes of my own childhood self, like taking in, yeah, in the 80s and 90s. And then I took a trip to London, which is my favorite writing city, and I started to write with no outline, no ideas of who would the characters would be or what would happen. And Reza came first. Judy was actually a character I had written for one of the rejected book that never happened. She was a character that I was writing in a contemporary novel, and I'd written like a chapter or two, and I loved her. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take her voice because I feel like she'd be really fun with Reza. And then Art came from that, and Uncle. So all the characters flowed. It was the first time, and part of the reason I think it's why it was a big turning point. Number one is because it was the first time I wrote genuinely from my own emotional experience. Right. The second is it was the first time I had what I think all artists want, which is an experience where you really feel like the book is writing itself and you're just a bystander. You all like, I have memories of like just writing and not even knowing what was happening. I'm like, all these stuff is coming and I'm just like typing and it feels like it's coming from some higher source. And it was so powerful. And, why the books resonated, I can't believe I thought I was writing the most niche book that would, please me and that nobody would read. But I now understand, having had that book out for, God, I don't know how many, I think it's been out about 5 years, that book. And it's traveled a lot of the world. It's very successful in Brazil, especially, which is a country that's become very close to my heart because of that. But I think I realized that the reason I wanted to tell that story was because I felt like that story hadn't been told. There were a lot of stories about the generation that was on the front lines of the AIDS crisis. So, obviously they get the majority of the attention, as they should, because they're the generation that lost their whole community and that fought back and that did everything to keep my generation safe. And then there's been a lot of queer representation about the generation after mine, which is the generation that came of age when AIDS started to become treatable and less scary, and they were living a more open queer life. But I realized there was this real gap in storytelling about my generation. Like, we were the generation that was coming into our teen years, realizing our sexuality when AIDS was at its worst. So we were the ones who were getting all the messaging of fear and stigma when we were very young. And it left such a huge impact. And I think it made it very hard to be vulnerable and intimate because all the messaging worked. We were afraid, and we were afraid of intimacy. We equated intimacy with death. We all thought we would die. I mean, really, like, all my friends of my generation, we always talk about this. Like, none of us imagined a life past 40. We just grew up thinking to be gay meant you died young. And what I've realized since writing Like a Love Story is a lot of people needed this story. A lot of people felt like their experience of those years had never been told. And then you add the layer of being Iranian and an immigrant, like so many stories that I grew up with about that era of queer life was so white. I mean, it really focused on white Western lives, and there never was anything that dealt with that intersection. I feel like I wanted to, that book has 3 narrators who alternates. Reza, who's Iranian, Judy, who's white and has an uncle who's living with AIDS and an activist, and then Art, who's like his school's only out gay teen, but he also gets to be that because he comes from a very wealthy white Manhattan family, and even though his family's not supportive, he's got like the privilege of being able to speak his mind in a way that Reza, as an Iranian, does. I think a lot of people don't understand necessarily the psychology of being an outsider and how it makes you unable to shake. You don't even understand the system. How are you going to shake it up? You're just kind of like, who am I in this system? Which is how I often felt when I was young. So it was, for me, it was just, it's a sad book, but it's also a joyful book. Like, I cried a lot when I wrote it, but I also laughed a lot and I filled it. The big surprise of writing the book for me was that I knew it would be sad. How could it not be when it's about the AIDS crisis? What I wasn't prepared for is how full it would be of like music and fashion and friendship and dancing. And so much of my research, I would talk to ACT UP members and they would tell me like, yes, we were devastated. We were losing our community. We were fighting all day, but then we were dancing all night. We were flirting. We were laughing. Like, those things coexist. And I also want young readers who are going through their own difficult times right now. I mean, you guys, this generation has gone through so much already between COVID and climate and fascism and God knows what else is to come. But,
oh gosh.
But just to remind young people, we have grown up in times of great crisis before, and we still found ways to
Have
celebrate,
fun.
dance, have fun, laugh, and that's okay. You're not a bad person for having a good time when suffering is happening. That's just the human experience. And yeah, it's a really special book for me, and I'm so happy that it resonated for others and really opened the door for every book that came after. Because if that book hadn't been as well received, I don't know if I would have dug as deep since then. I feel like every book I've written is in some way ripping out from my
Oh,
experience and my
wow.
core in a different way. I'm not just telling stories based on plot. I'm like excavating stories
It's like,
based on
what
personal.
lore do I have that I
Totally.
can?
Absolutely. I always now I begin my books. I don't begin with I never, like I said, I don't plot out my books, but I do begin with like a big question or piece of my life that I'm like, this is something I've yet to completely make sense of, or a
Like come to
question I'm still.
terms with.
Exactly. Yes.
Is that sort of how you feel about like the Chandler Legacies?
Yes. I mean, Chandler, I went to boarding school in the 90s, which was, in my opinion, a really good time to be young. I was very, very lucky. Um, and the majority of my boarding school experience was very positive, except for the first year.
Oh,
And
really?
yes, the first year of boarding school was immensely difficult for me. I was really out of place. I didn't feel like I was even the same age as everyone because I grew up much more sheltered than a lot of these kids. These were kids, I feel like in that era, American kids, especially kids of great privilege, like the boarding
Mm-hmm.
school mostly attracted, behaved like adults. I was still a very sheltered kid. And so there was a lot of bullying, there was a lot of hazing. The hazing scenes that Ramin goes through in the book are completely plucked from my experience. And if anything, they're toned down. I mean,
Oh
because a
my
lot of what
God.
happened, I think like would be too much for a YA book. And but I think for me, the biggest thing I was grappling with in that book was the question of how can I make peace with this institution that hurt me in such horrible ways and hurt so many of my friends, because there was this culture of
Right.
both
Bullying and hazing.
bullying and hazing, but also of sexual abuse from teachers to students. And so I was trying to make sense of how do I make peace with the hurt this place caused, with the fact that this institution also gave me all my best friends, the teacher that changed my life, the education and mentorship to make all my dreams come true, the sense of community I got. Like, it really is a confusing thing. And I think there's an instinct in the world these days to make everything very black and white and right and wrong. And I really feel like, if anything, to me, the through line of all my books is fighting against that and trying to build bridges and nuance, because I don't believe that you can say, like people will say about an institution like that, like, oh, just burn it down. But it's like, but then what about all the good it did? What about the fact that I would never have met my friends and my mentor and discovered my
Right.
creativity? Were it not like, yes, of course, I wish I hadn't gone through the horrible stuff, but the good stuff also happened. And so the book is, to me, it's a balancing of that, an exploration of that culture of abuse with a story of true friends who meet because of this school, who discover their power because of what the school
Right.
gives them. And it's an attempt, maybe unsuccessful for some, but successful for you. But it's an attempt to reconcile all the places in the world that do both good and bad things.
Right. Because I think a lot of people, I agree with you, a lot of people in my generation are like, this is bad, this is good, and there's no in
Yeah.
between whatsoever. And if you say something that's different than my opinion, you're wrong, and I'm not even gonna like listen to you. And I feel like that's just not a great way to approach life, because that's
agree.
not how life works.
I agree. I mean, I go through this is to me very much what my next book, Only This Beautiful Moment, like when
Yeah.
when people ask me what that's about, because that book is about an intergenerational story of an Iranian family.
Yeah.
You're focusing on the three men in the family, grandfather, father,
Son.
son, and two of them are queer and one of them is still somewhat homophobic, and you
Yeah.
get into all of their points of view. But that book very much was born out of a desire I had to speak to people who always wanted to divide, like, my experience as a queer person from my family and my culture,
Yeah.
because I didn't grow up with like a culture and a family that immediately embraced me when I came out. It was a struggle. And that doesn't mean I didn't love them or didn't have empathy for where they were coming from. But so many Western people were just like exactly what you're saying. It's like, cut them out of your life. You can't talk to them because they don't accept you. And I'm like, wait, I don't understand. You're suggesting I cut all these people out of my life. They're my family and my community. Like, so there is something happening right now, and I mostly blame social media, but maybe there's a lot of other factors that I'm not seeing. But I've had so many conversations recently with people who are just like, I don't talk to my aunt because she voted for X, or I don't go home anymore because we don't agree on this issue. And I'm like, well, but if all of us stop talking to our mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles because they don't agree with us, what do we have left? What's the fabric of our society? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't stand up. Like, I had so many uncomfortable conversations within my community. I still do. I feel like I've done so much to try and better conversations around queerness in the Iranian community, and we're seeing the results. Not that I take all the credit, but I take some credit because I put myself out there. But I just don't believe in closing the doors of communication. I feel like nothing good's going to come from that in the long run, other than making people feel good in the short term. Because
then it's like, I did this thing and now I feel empowered.
Well, and you feel right, and you feel like someone else is wrong.
Yeah.
But the thing is the person like, why is the person wrong? Like, that's what I wanted to do in Only This Beautiful Moment with the Saeed character. Who, you first meet him as a father who is somewhat homophobic. I mean, not aggressively so, but very similar to the way I experience homophobia in my culture. It's more one of denial and silence and compartmentalization of like, I accept you, just don't talk to me about it.
It's kind of like the people that are like, I support you, but not the lifestyle.
Exactly. But then you go back to the 1970s and you understand what he went through as a teenager, what he lost, the love he lost, the country he lost, the things he fought for. And hopefully readers will understand that you can't boil someone down to their one worst quality or one best quality. You have to get to know them. And I always tell young people, and that's why I love readers. Like, when I meet people like you who are young and read voraciously, I'm like, thank God, because you have to be curious. Like, if someone does something or says something that puts you on your guard or upsets you, the right response is not always to cut that person out. Sometimes the right response is to be like, why? Ask them questions. Get to know why they became that way.
Kind of like dig deep into that discomfort.
Well, and offer them. I think we all want empathy and curiosity. So offer it to someone else. And if you offer, I mean, that was one of the big revelations of my life. I was always like, oh, my parents don't accept me enough, or my community doesn't accept me enough. And I'm like, well, when have I asked them questions of their experience? Like, model the behavior you want others to give you. It's not always going to work. The world's not going to be rosy if we all do that, but it'll be a little bit.
It'll be a little bit. I'm like, we'll have paved the way for someone else, at least
One hopes.
A little bit.
One hopes. Yeah.
So who do you think was the most difficult character for you to write in Only This Beautiful Moment? Like, which of the three protagonists?
I mean, definitely Saeed.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. Because like I said, he's the other two characters are queer, and it was easier to write them for that reason. Saeed is very outside my own experience. And I wanted to write him with a lot of passion. Like, I wanted to make sure people understood that he also had a broken heart and also had all these dreams, but he was still able to be this imperfect father despite that. And I mean, I hope I succeeded. It was hard. That's the book I'm proudest of, to be honest, because it was, to me, the most ambitious and also the most personal. It's the one that really, like, I had to dig very, very deep, both into my own psyche and issues with generational trauma and immigration and queerness. And also it required the most difficult research because, like, with like a love story, it's very easy to find information on ACT UP. It's well documented. But Iran, unfortunately, doesn't have freedom of expression or freedom of the press, especially when researching queer life in Iran. There are no sources. So my sources were friends, cousins. Like, I would have to get people to talk to me, trust me, tell me the history. And so both for the contemporary Iran that I wrote and for Iran in the 70s, which I wrote, I had to really gather firsthand accounts and then use that to guide the story. But it was so fun.
Because the three characters were very, very different.
Yes.
I've read books where the authors have kind of made the characters a cut and paste sort of thing. And that was not the case at all with any of your books, but especially in Only This Beautiful Moment.
The beauty of writing books for me, who comes from a screenwriting background, is when you write anything for film or TV, a little piece of you is going to have to think about things like budget and like you can't, it's not easy in a movie or a TV show to be like, and now we're going to the 1930s in Hollywood and we're on the
Yeah.
MGM line. And in a book, it doesn't matter. Like you can be wherever you want, however you want. You can go as wide in scope as you want. And so with this one, I just loved being able to travel back and forth and show, that book is all about contrast. It's all about like, well, what was life like in US versus Iran in different times
Yeah.
and also the contrast of generations. Like Bobby is a queer character who is in his teen years in the 1930s. So he's obviously going to have a different experience as Mood, who's coming of age as a queer teen.
I just want to give Bobby a hug.
Oh, I love Bobby. I know.
And like, he went through so much.
He did, but he ends up having a happy life, I think.
Yeah.
I think, and it doesn't look like the life. That was another thing. I deal with a lot. It's hard. I mean, being someone from a culture that's very misunderstood in America is very hard. And I feel like this book was also my way of saying there are other ways of existing. There are other ways of being queer. There are countries where people they may not identify as queer. They may not be publicly queer. They may not engage in the same rituals of queer community that we do, but they still have a life and they still have a community. And I deal with that all. I mean, now I'm dealing with it just with, there's so much happening in the world. And I feel like I hear so many ignorant things about the history of like the relationship between the US and the Middle East. And so the book is also a way for me, hopefully in a very emotional way, because I don't want to preach to people and I'm not a historian, I'm not a nonfiction writer, but it was my way of just reminding people, because nobody knows in this country that the US ended democracy in Iran. Right. It was the CIA. It was the first time they staged a coup, actually. The CIA was formed. Oh, wow. And then the first coup was Iran in the 1950s. There was a democratically elected leader who wanted to nationalize the oil. And at that point, the oil was being taken by the Brits and the US. And so they got rid of him and they put a monarchy in. And so every time I hear people talk about like democracy, and the West just wants democracy, and there's no democracy in the Middle East, I'm like, yes, of course there's no democracy in the Middle East. You didn't want them. You wanted the oil, and you couldn't get the oil from democratic leaders. So, and it's not to say that like the book is not at all about politics, and it's not about like trying to make a statement about America, but it is about three generations. And I think when we talk about generations and when we talk about like moving forward in the world, we have to acknowledge the wrongs of the past. And we're seeing so many people struggling with that right now, whether it's like curriculums in schools that are like barring conversations about slavery or the Holocaust or the real history of what's happened in the Middle East. I mean, these are just facts. So it's like if we are not starting with basic facts, how are we going to find peace? And so that to me is another thing. When I was writing this book, I'm like, I just want a book that helps people through these characters understand people from this region are carrying a lot. They're carrying decades of conflict that are grounded in the actions of this country.
Speaking of the past, Ham in Desert Echoes also sort of has his own battles with the past. He goes to Joshua Tree twice in the book, first time with his boyfriend Ash, and the second time to find closure, with his school's GSA group about Ash's disappearance. And you did mention in your author's note that the character of Ash was based on your first boyfriend, Damon. And so I'm wondering, how did you approach writing Ash specifically? And how do you generally write characters that are inspired by different people in your life?
Oh, that's a good question. So, okay, first of all, when I say someone was inspired by, I really do mean inspired by. Damon is very different than Ash in so many crucial ways. So, when a character is inspired by someone in my life or by some piece of my life, I feel like I take that energy, the core of what they represented to me, and I try to then allow creativity to turn them into something very different. So in very important ways, Ash was like Damon. Ash is an artist, although in Ash's case, he's more of a visual artist. Damon was a musician. But the core of the kind of relationship Cam and Ash have is very similar to the kind of relationship Damon and I had. It was kind of young love. It was very, in the way of young love, it can be very passionate, very mad, very like you kind of are not looking at things logically because you're so caught up in
Yeah.
the magic of it, that you're not thinking like, oh, when he disappears to the desert to create, something's wrong. You're just like, no, of course, that's what people do if they're creative. They just disappear for a few days and don't call their boyfriends, like, which is something Ash does and something Damon did.
Yeah.
And so that, I think I grew up with no awareness of addiction, mental illness. A lot of things we now know about, they were completely hidden from me. And so when I met Damon in my early 20s, I wasn't looking for signs of anything. I just believed, I was so in love with him, I believed everything at face value. And it wasn't until later I realized he was struggling with a lot. And so I think a lot of what this book is about Cam's journey of making peace with not just losing his boyfriend, but also making peace with how could he have missed all this? What could he have done to save someone? Because I think inevitably when we love someone that we lose, we go through a period of blaming ourselves and thinking, well, what could I have done differently? Why am I to blame? Am I allowed to feel joy again? Am I allowed to fall in love again? That's a lot of what that's about. And we should talk about how Damon is peripherally connected to your life via your mom, right? So your mom and I first met because she was in Damon's show, which was called Bear, a pop opera. But I was taken to Bear by my friend Mark Russ, who I met studying at the Lee Strasberg Institute for Acting when we were teenagers, who I adore. I love Mark Russ. He took me there to set me up with his friend John Hartmere, who co-wrote Bear with Damon. The show is spectacular. The show is a masterpiece. It really is. I bawled my eyes. I mean, this show moved me so deeply. I saw it so many times, obviously, because I dated Damon. But it's kind of a gay Romeo and Juliet set in a Catholic boarding school. The music is stunning. It will rip your heart out. And then I was supposed to be set up with John Hartmere, and then I met Damon outside the show, and it was just one of those things where I looked in his eye, and it was very much like Ash and Cam, and much, in Desert Echoes, Ash and Cam bond over their love for Lana Del Rey. That's how they first meet, is that they write the same Lana song. But for me and Damon, it was music, just different musicians, because Lana wasn't making music yet. But we realized when we met that we both had the same Kate Bush CD in our car, and that was one of the first things that we were like, what? Because it just feels like this instant thing. Because back then, also Kate Bush, I know she went viral because of Stranger Things with Running Up That Hill, but back in our day in America, Kate Bush was a very niche artist. Right. So to have the same Kate Bush CD in your car was an odd thing. And then we realized we were both obsessed with Tori Amos after our first date. And then she became this huge part of our courtship. And so music, the way that art brings people together and makes them feel like they understand some secret part of each other, was very, very real for me and Damon. That is something I wanted to put in the relationship as well. I think if people read the descriptions of my books, they're going to think every single one is deeply depressing, but they're really not. They're not. And I am generally a hopeful person. I'm an open-eyed person and a clear-eyed person who wants to look at the harder parts of life, because I think if you try to bury them, they're going to come back and
they're going to
get you. Yes. But I also feel like the characters in my books tend to find joy and hope and love, and
in their deepest, darkest
moments. Yeah, absolutely. Which is what life is. And we should all, I think, be better at accepting that is the nature of life, that there will always be darkness and there will always be light. And we cannot control when the darkness and the light always comes. We can sometimes add to it.
Yeah.
But we have to accept it when it comes, and we should never feel guilty about the darkness and never feel like we don't deserve the light.
I'd also love to ask a few more questions about, your process, philosophy, and vision as, a creator. Let's start with, in all of your books, what has been your favorite character to write and develop?
Oh my God. I really don't know if I can answer that question. My favorite character to write and develop? I don't know that I have one. I mean, I do feel the closest emotionally to Only This Beautiful Moment. I do think that one,
you're thinking.
I really can't. I don't know if I can. I mean, maybe Bobby, because I love that you get to see him as a teenager and then you get to see him as a very old man, as a grandfather. And there's something, I'm obsessed with time. I've always been obsessed. I've always been one of those people who's stuck in time. I'm always researching some historical period. Even as a kid, I would be listening to music from the 30s and watching movies from the 40s. And, so to me, to write a character that you see at multiple
Yeah.
points in time is a very powerful and wonderful thing.
What do you enjoy the most about incorporating music icons into some of your work, like Madonna and like a love story and Lana Del Rey and Desert Echoes?
I guess it started with Madonna, like with Like a Love Story. I didn't realize how big of a part she would end up playing in the book.
Yeah.
But when I was excavating my own emotional life from that era, it became so abundantly clear how important she was to me and to
Mhm.
the whole generation. Like, young people have their own opinions of Madonna based on whatever's happening, in the world. But what I hope young people take away from that book is that in the 80s and 90s, when the AIDS crisis was happening, the gay community was vilified. They were stigmatized.
Right.
We were not, the president of the United States at the time, Ronald Reagan, didn't even say the word AIDS for 4 years. So, I mean, right now, as we do this interview, we're 4 years into the COVID pandemic. It would be as if no US president had even said the word, let alone started a policy. Just done nothing. Just let people die.
Wow.
So, and there were no celebrities. I mean, there were some celebrities many of whom were older, like Elizabeth Taylor, whose careers were generally behind them, who were standing up. And Elizabeth Taylor was a huge inspiration. And I do write about her in Like a Love Story as well. But Madonna was the biggest star for young people. I mean, her audience were like 10, 12, 13, 14.
Yeah.
When she released her Like a Prayer album, I was 13 years old. And inside there was a leaflet about safe sex and about, AIDS and fighting the stigma.
Yeah.
That was not being taught to my age group at the time. I mean, were it not for Madonna, a whole generation, I was not taught that, like by my family or by school, because you couldn't even talk about gay sex. When Truth or Dare and the Vogue video and that whole era, which was when the book takes place, 1909 and 1990 came out, it was the first time that I saw any image of gay men that wasn't rooted in their death or their stigmatization. I mean, she presented all these brown and black men of color, as her friends, as her dancers, as her family. She made a whole movie where she shone a spotlight on them. In the movie, there was the first gay pride parade I ever saw, the first gay kiss I ever saw. You talk to almost every gay man of my generation to say the same thing. That was the first gay kiss they saw, the first pride parade they saw. Before that, it was just like, you're going to die and you're horrible. And then Madonna came, and she took a lot of really big risks. And I sometimes get a little defensive when it comes to her, because people love to say that she like exploited the gay community or stole from the gay community because, of course, the work she did became so popular. But actually, she really risked quite a lot. And she did so much in terms of supporting the charities, showing up. So, for me, that was a very organic thing. Once I started to write about ACT UP, about the activists, the artists who were helping, I'm like, how could I not write about Madonna? Like, it would be a huge gap in the history. Then, with Lana, it was a little different. Like, this book is not about, in this book, Lana is not treated in the same way as Madonna. But to me, Lana is like the artist of the last decade or so, or 15 years of my life. She really is the artist I listen to the most. She means a lot to me. She opened a lot of like emotional avenues for me to explore through her lyrics and songwriting. And when I was writing this book, I really wanted that, like I said, that relationship to mirror the kind of relationship I have with Damon. And because music was so important to us, and for us, it was Tori, really. But I was like, who is today's Tori? And it really is Lana. And so I wanted to show the power of art to bring people together.
And what do you hope your audience takes away from your work?
Oh, God.
I feel like we've sort of talked about this throughout.
Have. I really hope that, I hope, and I think my books do this, I just hope the audience takes away from my work that they need to be more open to new conversations, uncomfortable conversations, that when you're talking about the arts, it's a space to get beyond right and wrong. When we write a book, we're not writing it to make one person right and one person wrong. We're writing it to delve into the entire nuance of the human experience and hopefully make everyone equally right and wrong, or equally not right and not wrong. But to present a way to have difficult conversations that aren't about pointing fingers and blame and division. I really do get frightened by how divided people are these days.
People like blame each other just because they don't
and
share
people
the
don't want to have conversations. They don't want to sit down and have really difficult conversations. And so I hope that what my books help help readers get to as they grow up is seeing the value in
Nuance.
that. Yes.
And let's do some fun lightning round questions.
Yes.
So it's like
yes.
icebreaker style, like quick question, quick answer. What's your favorite non-curse word insult?
I mean, is deranged an insult? It kind of is. I mean, I use deranged as a compliment, but I love it.
I
always say
love being
things are
called deranged because people are like, she's weird. And I'm like,
yeah.
I'll take that.
Same. I'm always like, when people call me weird, I'm like, yes, thank you.
But
What do you want to be, boring and normal? What's yours?
I use stinky as a noun. So
Oh,
I'll be
I
like,
like
you
stinky.
stinky. And then
I
that'll
like
be
stinky.
What's your favorite Lana Del Rey song?
God, it's so hard. It's genuinely so hard to pick one Lana Del Rey song. I go back and forth all the time on what my favorite is.
Well, what about right now?
The song that I listen to a lot right now is How to Disappear from Norman Rockwell. Good. I really love that. What's yours?
Sweet.
I love Sweet. That's one of my top 3 from the new album.
Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
No, hard pass. You like it?
Well, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's not my go-to, but if it's there,
no, I don't want
I
it
will.
Near
I mean,
me.
if there's other options, I will skip it. But if it's like,
do you want to hear something even more controversial?
What?
I don't like pizza toppings. I like a margarita.
I like margarita.
I like basil, and that's it.
What about mushrooms?
No. Well, mushrooms I don't mind. I don't mind mushrooms, but for the most part, if you're ordering pizza with me, I will always order a margarita.
I mean, I love margarita, but like, serious? That's insane.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
No. Is anyone?
That's a great question that we should do another.
Yes. Exactly.
Yes. So do you like the middle brownie piece or the edge brownie piece?
Oh God, now you're really gonna ask if I'm okay.
Yeah.
I hate brownies.
How?
No, I know. Our daughter is a baker. She has discovered the things that I like when it comes to baked goods. I like a plain scone.
That's so British.
I'm very British. I'm obsessed with the UK. I swear in a past life my next book is going to have a lot. It's going to be my, I always said I start from a place of these are the things I love. And it's going to have a lot of London. But yeah, I don't like brownies. I'm sorry. What about you? What was the question? Middle or side?
Middle or edge.
I reject them both. Which one do you like?
I don't know. It depends on the day. So sometimes if I want like a crispier outside and a softer inside, I'll take the edge. But sometimes I just want brownie. And but you see me, you're
But wouldn't you rather go have brownies with someone like me who's going to just give you my piece?
Yes.
I also don't like donuts, most cookies, the majority of cake. But I love sweets. I'm obsessed with sweets. I love ice cream.
How? Okay, so we're going to go deep now. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
So if you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Honestly, I think the advice would be not to care so much what other people think. That was the thing that stopped me for so long. I think all the things I did in my life, like writing, all the stuff you asked about earlier, writing these books, putting myself on the page as a queer Iranian, I'm so happy I did it. I'm so happy I got to the point to do it. The reason I didn't do it sooner was the fear of what other people think. And I think when we're young, we care so much about that. But I will say for any young listener, and hopefully there'll be lots of young listeners, I also very much believe adults can't tell you not to make your own mistakes. You have to make your own mistakes, it's all part of the journey. And so, yes, you can always look back and say, oh, I wish I'd done X or not cared about Y. But part of being young is learning by messing up. And I think that's so important to remember. Never strive for perfection. That's not the goal ever. The goal is growth.
Wow, that was deep. You are a very deep person, Abdi.
Am I? I mean, I don't know.
I mean,
I can be very silly.
You can be very silly. I mean, I think it's very silly that you don't like brownies, but that's a separate conversation.
Kind of silly, I know, but I love ice cream.
I agree. My brother actually doesn't like ice cream.
Okay, See, and you're concerned about my mental health
Yes.
because of brownies? Go take care of your brother.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, I wanted to ask if there was a particular cause or organization that's, near and dear to your heart. As you may know, Stories Without Borders really strives to amplify organizations that, use the power of stories and service to positively impact the world. So, we'd love to, amplify anything that you care about.
There's so many organizations I could talk about. I mean, obviously with like a love story, which
Right.
focuses on AIDS, I hope everyone who's young, I know this is not taught still, but understands that HIV is not over. Yes, it's more treatable, but there's still quite a lot of cases, even in the
Mhm.
United States, and it's mostly young people. So any organization that's working on outreach and education, like AMFAR or AIDS Project
Yeah.
Los Angeles, I mean, there's so many. But the one I guess I'll shout out for real, because I shouted out in Desert Echoes at the end. That book really touches on addiction. I really do believe often like the organizations we should shine a light on are smaller, more
Yeah.
local. My husband's on the board of a recovery home called Awakening Recovery out
Mhm.
here. It's a really different model. It's like a sober living facility. It's a longer term care facility, and the results really speak for themselves. So everyone should look up Awakening Recovery. They take donations. I think, unfortunately, we have seen in the United States, and I would guess across the world, because of the way the economy works, that they have cut a lot of funding for addiction services, mental health services, a lot of the services people need when they need help with
Yeah.
their recovery. And so it's so important to fill those gaps.
Yeah. That sounds like a really awesome organization.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh my God, thank you for having me.
I had so much fun.
This was a blast.
I had a blast as well. So
Thank you. I'm
so
glad there were no brownies in front of us.
Thanks for listening to Stories Without Borders, the podcast. Please rate and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. You can learn more online at storieswithoutborders.org or follow us on Instagram at stories_without borders. See you all next time.